Have you ever wondered why even after achieving everything you thought you wanted, you still feel like something is missing? Why the meaning of life feels so fragile, almost like an illusion we invent just to survive the emptiness? And here's the most unsettling question of all. If everything ends with death, then why live at all? This wasn't just a casual thought experiment. For Leo Tolstoy, one of the greatest writers in history, it became an unbearable torment that nearly consumed him. Imagine this. You have worldwide fame, immense wealth, a loving family, a name that will echo through the centuries thanks to works like War and Peace and Anna Karenina. By every measure, Tolstoy had everything. And yet he woke up every morning staring into an abyss. His own words were haunting, and my life came to a stop. I could breathe, walk, eat, sleep, but there was no life in me. This wasn't a passing crisis, it was a daily torment. He had conquered literature, won the admiration of intellectuals, captured the hearts of millions of readers. And still he felt utterly hollow. Philosophy gave him no answers. Science made him feel even smaller, lost in a cold, indifferent universe. His success didn't silence the void, it only amplified it. Tolstoy compared himself to a man running desperately through a dark forest, chased by a beast he could never escape. That beast was death, always stalking, always waiting. And the more he ran, the more he realized nothing he did could change the inevitable. But here's the shocking part. This was only the beginning of his journey. Because in his search for meaning, Tolstoy would stumble upon a truth so simple, and yet so powerful it could change your life too. For most of us, success and meaning feel like synonyms. Society whispers in our ear, achieve big goals, build a legacy, be admired, then you'll find fulfillment. But what happens when you get there and still feel empty? Or worse, when the emptiness only grows deeper? That was Tolstoy's cruel discovery. He had climbed the mountain of success only to find a great silence at the top. Nothing was enough. Every time he reached a new milestone, a finished book, a new project, another triumph, the joy slipped away like water through his fingers. And it wasn't just him. As he looked around, Tolstoy saw his friends, famous intellectuals, celebrated artists, people who seemed to have it all. Yet behind closed doors, they were collapsing under the same invisible weight, a silent suffering disguised as success. Can you imagine that the very people the world envied were living in quiet despair? This realization sent Tolstoy spiraling. He could no longer focus on his writing. The hobbies that once brought him joy now felt meaningless. Even the love of his family, something he deeply valued, couldn't shield him from the void growing inside. He started asking himself a terrifying question. If death wipes everything away, then what's the point of living at all? Legacy, it fades. Books forgotten. Civilizations themselves crumble into dust. Why would the life of one man, his life, have any lasting meaning? It was as if Tolstoy had opened a door he could never close again, a door to despair. And now he stood face to face with it. Where could he look for answers? Philosophy, science, religion? Or should he accept the darkest possibility of all, that life is nothing more than an absurd accident without explanation? That question would drive him into an even deeper abyss. Before he found the first flicker of light, Tolstoy couldn't just ignore the emptiness. He needed an answer. Something rational, something solid, something that could prove life was worth living, even knowing death would eventually erase everything. And so he did what any great intellectual of his time would do. He turned to philosophy. He devoured the works of Plato and Aristotle, wrestled with the skeptics, rationalists, and existentialists. He turned to science, to ethics, to logic itself. Surely, if anyone had faced this abyss before him, the greatest minds in history must have left behind a rope to climb out. But the deeper he read, the darker it became. Schopenhauer, with his relentless pessimism, seemed to confirm Tolstoy's worst fears. Life is nothing but endless suffering without a final purpose. Kant, with his razor-sharp analysis of reason, proved that the meaning of life could never be rationally demonstrated. Nietzsche went further, dismissing purpose itself as a human invention, a story we tell ourselves. Can you imagine how crushing this must have felt? The very thinkers Tolstoy hoped would save him only pushed him deeper into despair. And science. Science was even more brutal. Biology and physics painted a picture of a cold, indifferent universe. Life was reduced to chemistry, to accidents, to a flicker of existence in a cosmos that didn't care. Death wasn't a transition, it was the end. Full stop. Tolstoy described the sensation as if he were a shipwrecked sailor floating alone in an ocean of answers that gave him no reason to live. And it wasn't just his mind that suffered. The despair seeped into his body. He lost sleep, neglected his health, distanced himself from loved ones. Some nights, he even removed certain objects from his room, terrified that in a moment of hopelessness, he might use them against himself. It was more than a crisis. It was a haunting, and yet, in the middle of this storm, something inside him refused to give up. A tiny spark, a stubborn resistance to fully surrender to the void. What was it? Instinct fear of the unknown, or maybe it was a sign that the meaning of life does exist, but he had been searching for it in the wrong places. Tolstoy didn't know yet, but this flicker of hope would lead him somewhere unexpected. If the philosophers couldn't save him and science only made the abyss wider, where else could Tolstoy look? He began to wonder, maybe I've been searching in the wrong places all along. So instead of turning to books and theories, he started paying attention to the people around him, the ones nobody considered wise. The peasants, the farmers, the humble workers. These were people who had never read Kant or Nietzsche's T. They didn't debate Schopenhauer in salons. They lived in small houses, worked the land, struggled with hardship every day. And yet, unlike the intellectuals and noblemen Tolstoy knew, they weren't drowning in existential despair. They woke up early, worked hard, shared meals with their families, laughed, prayed, slept, and did it all again the next day. Simple lives, but not empty lives. This astonished Tolstoy. How could people who had so little seem to have so much peace? He began speaking with them, listening to their stories. None could give him a grand philosophical answer, but all of them carried a quiet certainty, an acceptance of life, a trust that it had meaning even if they couldn't prove it. And slowly, a realization hit Tolstoy like lightning. Maybe the meaning of life isn't something you solve with your mind. Maybe it's something you live. The peasants had something in common, something Tolstoy had dismissed for most of his life. Faith. Not the kind of faith argued about in seminaries or written into thick theological books. Not dogmas or abstractions, but lived faith. A natural trust. A connection to something larger than themselves. They didn't demand proof that life had meaning. They simply lived as if it did. And in that trust, they found peace. For the first time in years, Tolstoy felt a glimpse of calm. Maybe, just maybe, the mistake was trying to force life into a logical formula when life was never meant to be solved, but experienced. But this discovery was only the beginning of his transformation. Tolstoy. The brilliant thinker who had dissected the human soul in novels, read around the world, was now humbled by a truth he had never expected. Perhaps the meaning of life wasn't something to prove, but something to live. Faith, the very thing he once dismissed as naive, began to reveal itself as the only answer that truly made sense. But it wasn't blind faith. It wasn't about obeying rituals or clinging to dogma. What Tolstoy saw in the peasants was practical faith. Faith lived through action. In the way they worked honestly, in their devotion to family, in their acceptance of life's cycles, birth, struggle, loss, death, and their trust that it all belonged to something bigger than themselves. For them, faith wasn't a theory. It was a way of breathing. A way of waking up every day with peace even in the face of hardship. And suddenly, Tolstoy realized all the philosophers he had studied, all the books he had devoured, had never given him the peace that a simple farmer felt when stepping into his fields at dawn. Think about that for a second. Could it be that the search for an ultimate answer is exactly what blinds us to the meaning that's right in front of us? Maybe life isn't a puzzle to be solved, but a mystery to be embraced. This thought began to transform him. He started to see meaning not in intellectual certainty, but in love, in surrender, in connection to others, in recognizing that some truths can't be explained, but are still real. Tolstoy wrote, "I lived my whole life demanding proof when all I needed was trust. The answer was always there. I just refused to see it. For the first time, the endless struggle against emptiness loosened its grip. He didn't need to conquer life with reason. He only needed to live it fully openly, with love." But this realization didn't just change his thoughts. It demanded he change his entire way of life. And that's exactly what he set out to do. Tolstoy's revelation didn't stay locked in his mind, it spilled over into his entire life. For decades he had been a nobleman wrapped in wealth, fame, and recognition. But now, none of it mattered. He no longer wanted titles, luxury, or applause. He began rejecting everything he once valued. He dressed in simple clothes. He abandoned wealth. He even tried to give away his property. But this transformation wasn't welcomed by everyone. His family, especially his wife Sophia, was horrified. She had built her life around aristocratic comfort, and suddenly her husband was rejecting it all. Their once solid marriage became a battlefield of clashing worlds, one of luxury, the other of simplicity. Yet Tolstoy was determined. He devoted himself to humanitarian causes, helping peasants, promoting non-violence, preaching humility and compassion. He declared that the only meaning of life is to serve others and to live with love. But even then, peace didn't come easily. Inside, he still felt a tension. He was a man caught between two worlds, the old one he couldn't return to, and the new one that demanded sacrifices few around him could understand. At 82 years old, after years of inner conflict, Tolstoy made a radical decision. In the middle of the night, he fled his home. He left behind wealth disputes and expectations, seeking to live his final days in pure simplicity like a common man. But his body could no longer keep pace with his spirit. He fell gravely ill on the journey, and in a small, cold train station, surrounded not by nobles, but by strangers. Tolstoy breathed his last breath. His end was symbolic. The man who had once owned estates, fame, and influence died far from luxury, in the quiet simplicity he had longed for. Yet his story didn't end there. Because Tolstoy's journey leaves us with a haunting question. Are we searching for meaning in all the wrong places? Is life's true purpose not in wealth, fame, or recognition, but in the smallest things? In love, compassion, and presence? Tolstoy never solved the mystery of life with logic or theories. What he discovered was something far more profound. The meaning of life isn't found in understanding it. It's found in living it. Not in endless achievements, not in recognition, not even in the pages of philosophy, but in love, in compassion, in faith, in the simple act of showing up fully for the present moment. He realized that happiness doesn't come from proving life has meaning, it comes from trusting that it does. And maybe that's the real secret. So, let me ask you, are you chasing meaning in the next success, the next recognition, the next big thing? Or are you willing to pause, breathe, and see that the meaning may already be here in the smallest, simplest moments? Tolstoy's journey is more than the story of a great writer. It's the story of a man who dared to face the biggest question of all. What makes life worth living? And his answer was not in grand achievements, but in presence, in love, in surrender. So now, I'll leave you with this question. What makes your life worth living? Take a moment, really think about it. And if this video sparked something inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who might be searching too. And if you want to keep exploring these questions, subscribe to the channel. Not because it helps me, but because it helps spread these ideas to more people who need them. Because once you see life this way, you'll never see it the same again.